My name is Linnea Ritland. I wrote and directed Everything's Great. I did a bit of a film degree at UBC, and I'm based in Vancouver, BC, Canada.
My name is Omer Ben-Shachar. I studied at AFI, and the film I'm sharing, called Nina, was actually a film I submitted to as a submission film to get into AFI.
Cool. That actually relates to one of the questions I was going to ask you, which was like, why did you make this film? How is it important to you? Like, what is
Right.
it? What was the motivation behind it?
Well, so the prompt that they had asked for was to do a scene about a surprise. And it was an very interesting prompt because, I mean, in a way, every film has a surprise, right? And I found myself every time that I was writing a scene about a surprise, I found that it became about something else every time. I think it was because, a surprise is something so sudden, and then it's about something else. So I was trying to figure out how I can make a surprise that lasts for
Right.
2 minutes. And then I thought, what if a character surprises someone a few times over and over again? And then I remembered a story that my grandmother told me about her mother that had Alzheimer's, and how every time she visited her, she would show the same photo of her granddaughter because it made her so happy. And that's the moment they connected over every time. And I thought there was something so moving about it, and interesting, and also cinematic. She's willing to sacrifice a lot, right, to connect with her mom. So
Yeah, it's really sweet. Like, you packed a lot into like 3 minutes. It's really impressive. And it's interesting to hear that it was like a bit of a personal story as well, because I was going to ask, like, so my film is very much based on my own experiences, as you may or may not be able to tell. My father escaped from the hospital once and like just turned up. So that was like the central like kernel of it, and then I kind of built it out from there. I mean, in terms of like how you get stories for your films, do you find that you mostly draw from your own personal life, and like how do you feel about that?
Definitely. I definitely think that is my approach. It's also the way I've kind of always seen art, which was a place for me to express the things that in my day-to-day I don't have a chance to, and the things I'm afraid of or insecure about, or questioning. Cinema is a great way for me to do something with those things that otherwise we don't get a chance to. What about you? So you draw obviously from your personal life. What makes you decide what is valuable to take from your personal life and what isn't?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. That's like an interesting way to approach it. I recently took a course with Alexander Chi, who's like this great novelist, Korean-American. And he talks a lot, he's done a lot of autobiographical stuff, and he talks a lot about like his experiences coaching creative writing. And there's this trap that a lot of his writers fall into, that like in film school, like watching short films, you definitely see where people do things just because it happened. Like, it really happened, so it must be interesting, when the reality is like not everything that happens to us is very interesting. And even the things that do happen to us that are interesting, we really need to do a process of like sorting and curating and like making it cinematic or making it interesting for other people to hear about in this specific format. Because like, of course your friends think that your life is like riveting, or at least they should, hopefully, but transferring it into like a film properly takes like a certain amount of finessing and editing, and like honestly departing it from what really happened into like the beats of what actually makes a story interesting. So like for Everything's Great, like I took these few moments that happened and like the general feelings, and then transported it into like not me. Because like the other thing is, I'm finding like as I make more art, live more as a human, like when I was a little younger, I was more brazen about like, yeah, I'll just take these stories and like tell them because they're mine to tell. But the reality is, like, when you are telling personal stories, there are other people that are involved that may or may not be recognizable to people who like are watching it. So yeah, the ethics of that is a little questionable, especially if you're not really showing them in the best light. So I find like with that in mind as well, it's important to like editorialize a little bit and make it a little more fictional.
Right.
Just to go to sleep at night and not worry about like offending people.
Right.
So,
well, I
yeah.
think it's so interesting to talk about, because I often hear, this advice, write what you know, and I think it's really true. But what does that really mean? Does that mean to write what really happened? Or maybe there can be an experience you know, like when I watch Ratatouille, it feels so personal, but Arad didn't write the film, right? So I think it's always tap into what's underneath the story.
Yes.
It's often a system of belief. I feel like there's this exercise that I know they do at Pixar where you choose your 3 films that you would take on an island with you, that you love so much, like, you know, and you probably love them for a reason, and then look at the climactic scene where the character makes a choice towards the end, and you'll find that it's the same theme, it's the same choice in all these movies. It's the same belief that these characters have, and I think that's really where the personal comes in. It's what do you believe about life, and what's your life philosophy that shows up, or your fears and all those stuff, but it doesn't have to be directly.
Yeah. Like I've heard the advice of like, so like in both of our cases, we like wrote and directed something. So like, obviously we have a personal connection to what we wrote, but even if you are directing something that someone else wrote, it's important to like figure out why you in particular are suited to this film and like what you're bringing to it. So like, you don't need to have been a rat operating like some guy using his hair to relate to Ratatouille on some level. Like, maybe you know, really wanted to do some skill and then like had to work really hard to like have validation from people who didn't believe in you. Like, that's kind of a general.
Yeah, I think, you know what, I think maybe personal is the arc, the character arc. It's a journey you have gone through, and you've learned a lot. And it's crazy to think, I always am like, this, when I first heard about this exercise, I was like, there's no way we have more than one theme, right? But you'll find like we are guided around this one belief system.
I guess like as a note going off of this idea of like central themes rather than concrete instances being really important to a story, like another, just to inject a little bit more like Alexander Chee writing advice, and also something that I was looking for like as I was going through like education in the film, in a film school. There's a lot of focus on characters, arcs, decisions in film school and conventional writing classes, but I was always wondering like this one formula of like choice, climax, and then like denouement, like is that the only way? And Alexander Chee, and I'm sure other writers as well, have been exploring like alternate narrative forms. So he has this idea of like, in a narrative you can also just explore a system, which kind of speaks a little bit to what you're talking about of like belief systems. So be that like systems of oppression, which he focuses a lot on in his work, but even like interpersonal dynamics within a family is something you can explore. And as long as you're like aware of what you're saying about the system, aware of how you personally are like acting within it, there's really interesting stuff to be like explored within that doesn't necessarily have to be about like one guy making some choices, right? But I mean, I'm not like an expert in this field. I just find it really interesting of like
that sounds very interesting.
These alternate forms of narratives that I would like to explore more.
Unfortunately, in this film, I can't say too much about the production line because honestly, we had the location and it was my house and it was so perfect. So it was my grandmother's story, my grandfather's house, and the lead actress is my grandfather's friend. So all the credit goes to my grandfather, and I guess the production design too. But we did, we worked with a space and what we had around it. What about the production design in your film? Because it's so great, and that opening shot and the so I have to give kudos to my amazing production designer Courtney Verwold, who's also credited as an executive producer because she just put so much into this film. It's almost the opposite. Like we started with like empty rooms basically, and she had to like bring everything in, which is a nice like luxury almost, because like you totally get to like completely design a space, but there was also like a van full of prop stuff. Like there's a certain amount of like it requires a lot of work to do that, but in that way like we were really able to like cultivate like who these characters were based on their spaces. So like the home setting is very much like the mom's like very kind of austere choices with like a single orchid on a table, and then you have like Alexis's space, which is like very cool and edgy. Like we printed out, there's like I think there's some tentacle porn in the back of one of the shots if you can like look a little close. I think a lot of the film ended up being like really trying to portray these people and all the contrasts between them, and doing that through costume, doing that through production design, doing that through lines, of course, and like acting. So it was really fun to work on that, and it was really fun to like do the glitter part. It failed like 3 times,
But when it worked, finally, we got like even more genuine reactions from our actors.
Yeah, it's great that you incorporated the production design and the mistake into like a humorous piece of part of the film. And definitely, I think it's a very good point about how production design is really such an efficient way to give us insight about the characters. When you can write dialogues and monologues of who these characters are, sometimes the space they're in. And you can even, as an exercise, I feel like, look in your own space and be like, what is this? I do that sometimes. Like, what does this space say about me? And yeah, and even if it's empty, that means something. And, what stuff do you hang on the walls? What stuff are you proud of? Or when you go into someone else's house, it's always interesting to see what the place is saying about the character. Same thing with wardrobe too, and all these choices, which to summarize, I think that's the thing that fascinates me most about directing, is so many tiny little choices that make such a big difference. And it kind of feels like magic tricks sometimes, where you're like, a scene like doesn't work at all, you can't connect to the character, then suddenly you like let them have different shoes and the height between the two actors becomes different, and it works. And it's the shoes, and I think you have to be, I love learning this all the time, and I'm like, I wonder if there's, and I'm sure there are directors who like, oh, it's the shoes, oh, it's the lamp, it's the way they're seated that is going to change the dynamic of the scene. And a lot of it is discovering, and a lot of it is probably from experience. But isn't it fascinating, those little...
Oh my gosh, yeah, the like little character moments. Which like I find part of it is just being open to like what your crew think and your actors think, where your actors like, I would love to put on hand sanitizer as soon as I touch him to be like gross. And I'm like, yes, absolutely, please. But a lot of it is like found on set, on like, you're just on location, your cinematographer is like, what about this angle? And you're like, that's great, that's totally saying what I want to say. Which I guess relates to like another question that I had for you of like, how much did you plan and how much did you adapt?
Yeah, it's a very good point what you're saying about actors as well, right? Because it's really important that through the role they express themselves fully. And that means, I often find like shot listing is great, but you have to see what blocking the characters give you. And, and you want to shot list around that, right? And around their instincts. It's usually always the right thing. I think planning is great, but obviously when you're on set and, you want to be adaptable and accept what reality is telling you. Same thing, by the way, with story too. Tell me if you feel similar, but when writing a screenplay, right? You come in with all these plans of how you see the movie, how it's going to be. But the truth is, you don't know what it's going to be, A, until you get to the end and write the end, and then B, until the second draft, third draft, film it, and then edit it, and then see it, and then you're like, oh, that's what the movie was about this whole time. So it's confusing because you're creating this thing, but it gets a life of its own, and you have to listen to what it wants to be. You can't force it to be something.
Yeah.
A movie, and it's always fascinating. Every movie is different, and every movie you write has a life. Do you have that same feeling when you're writing, when you're creating?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it is just being, like, in order to get any movie made, you need to be so flexible, because, like, you don't know where you're going to film, you don't know who's going to turn up, you don't know who's going to bail at the last second, like, there's no way to plan. There's some things you can plan, like, I know for all of the things that I've done so far, it's important to me to, like, get a rehearsal with the actors so that we think about the blocking in advance, so we kind of know, like, what the shape of the scene is going to be, and then that way I can, like, plan the shot list based on their blocking. But beyond that, like, yeah, there's still so many things that are going to happen on the day that you just don't know. So, like, plan and then, like, just throw it out the window. Because, like, I guess it relates to kind of some of the first things you were talking about of, like, the story at its heart is not necessarily, like, what's happening, but what you're trying to say with it. So it doesn't need to take place where you think it needs to take place. Honestly, it could take place any number of places, you know?
And do you feel like those surprises sometimes, like, okay, if you have to change your location, suddenly the scene makes so much more sense. It's like the reality and the changes that happen are kind of meant to be in ways. Often.
That's very optimistic of you.
But I really feel that way. You know, I
Mhm.
really feel that way. I think it's maybe something about planning for something and then seeing it in another light that kind of clicks, right?
Yeah.
And I also want to ask you, I noticed there's a lot of runners, and I'm curious if that's an approach you usually take with your filmmaking and why you make that choice.
I partially made it because I was watching a lot of Asian minimalist films, so like Hong Sang-soo, even Ozu, like way back. And I loved them so much. Like there's something about just sitting in a room and just being able to like look where you want to look that I find like more captivating, because it's like, you know, we were able to set up like one shot for a room and then be like, okay, we're gonna put this here and this here and this here, and like we filled it enough to make it like interesting, I would like to think. Part of it as well is like it's easier. Our days moved quite quickly. We shot it in like 3 days, I think, which is pretty quick for I think a 15-minute film. Oh, I guess another inspiration was Punch Drunk Love. I love that so much. And like the sense of like anxiety that you get from just, again, like sitting and not being able to like release with the cut.
It's so interesting that you say it saves time, because in my experience, it always adds time, because I guess it depends on like, because you know that if you have a runner, I mean, do you shoot coverage and then like of close-ups and then later you decide, or you just shoot the runner?
For this film, I just shot oneers. It was like super minimal. I was like, I know I just want it to be like one shot per scene and then we're done.
That is very brave, because you don't have backups, and in the editing, right, you can't take stuff you don't like out. You just have to accept all of the imperfections that exist in the runner. So I'm terrified of runners, but
try it sometime. It's honestly kind of liberating, because like there's so much acceptance that has to go into it, for sure. Yeah.
And another question I wanted to ask you, that's a broader question, is what made you get into filmmaking in the first place?
Yeah, so I watched a lot of YouTube as a young child. I always was really like into kind of like edutainment, honestly, like people talking about interesting ideas, and also some of the like more whimsical sides of YouTube. Like there's one YouTuber called Kick the PJ who did like animations way back when, and I like loved them so much. So yeah, I was just really fascinated by this, like kind of like what you said before, by this escape that's like reality, but like a little bit distance from it and more like an analytical perspective. Yeah, and then just went through high school like doing more animations, doing more little projects, and then here I am, having made some films. What about you?
I think so. As a kid, I was very interested in theater specifically, and I would put up a lot of plays in our living room and then ask my dad to like film them so we could send to other people. And I used to watch those videos that he filmed. They just didn't capture the performance, because they were like basically a wide shot, 40 minutes. Also, these plays were not good. So, you know.
You were a kid. I'll cut you some slack.
But, you know, as a kid looking at it, I was like, is this what these plays look like? Like, I hope they're better. And then I started realizing that you can cut and you can like emphasize certain things. So I just started asking my dad, like, let's film these parts in close-ups. Let's film these parts in medium shots. He had his own input too of how to film it. And then I started editing it. And that's really when I realized, you know, kind of the power of these tools and how you can tell a better story. At some point, these theater pieces, I stopped inviting people to come see it, and I just made the movies instead, because they were more powerful than, even though, you know, I love the experience of a theater space and people seeing it live, but that's when I really discovered, I think, the magic of tools, the filmmaking tools to tell a story. Yeah. This
might be totally off base, but do you feel like part of it is also that you could watch it back and like you could also experience what you were doing? Yeah.
It so bothered me that like a theater happened and then it's over and no one else, like, what? No, so it's also about preserving and feeling like watching it and analyzing it, and also knowing like, oh, it's still there. It's not like a one-time thing that you do and it disappears. I think that's definitely something that appealed to me. Did you also have a similar feeling when you made it?
Yeah, I mean, I was like kind of into like drama classes when I was a teen, but I think along with that, like I always found like the fact that you can edit reality really interesting, like adding animations to it. I did integrated animation for a couple of my pieces, and I just love it. Just like, it's reality, but not quite.
So much of filmmaking is re-editing, rewriting, redoing. It's not good when it starts out. It's usually bad. And that knowledge, like knowing how things can improve, like a first cut and a final cut, two different worlds, two different movies, and a first draft and a final draft, so different. So I think there's so much value to re-editing and perfecting it.
Yeah. I totally agree. I've heard the advice of like, if you're stuck on a project or if you think you have reached a good point, like block it up for a few months, like put it in a box somewhere, put it away, and then come back and read it later, and you might have like a fresh perspective. And like, I think, or even I've heard the advice of like, throw away your first draft and rewrite it from your memory, because then you like, you're editing it through just like recall and like what actually stuck out about it.
Totally. Try things, right? Like, let yourself be surprised. It is a surprising medium, kind of like the example of the shoes. I feel like sometimes if you just flip 2 shots, or, you know, you stay on a shot 2 seconds longer, suddenly you like the character you didn't like, or the other way around. So try things in the writing, and, you know, push yourself to do things you didn't expect that could give a result. And
yeah, I
also wanted to ask you, what's the best advice that you got in your lifetime about film?
I don't know. I guess like, honestly, going like riffing off of that, film is so much about trying. And so for me, film is so much about collaborating with people you trust. So like, I don't know if this is like advice that I received, but it's like something I've learned over the years of like, build up your teams, work with people, because they're going to bring new ideas that you could have never thought of. So like, bring on a different editor. I've like edited several of my pieces, but like working with a different person to edit was so valuable, because like they have a totally different perspective. Similarly, editing other people's pieces is just so fascinating, because like you're able to bring that fresh perspective. So yeah, filmmaking is collaborative, and remember that. Is there any advice that really stuck out to you over the years?
Yeah, one advice in middle school, actually, in a film class, where the instructor said, make a list of the 3 things that keep you up at night and write about one of them. And I think it made me realize what I was kind of telling earlier, that film is a place to express things you're scared of, and a way to learn more about yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice, honestly.
Right? I know.
One last question for you.
Yeah.
How has your perspective on filmmaking changed over the years? Like, what did you used to think about it, and what do you think about it now?
I think now I'm a very strong believer in making sure the script is very, very good before you take it out. And I think I've become more patient. I'm realizing that it does take a lot of drafts, more than you think. And it's just like Mission Impossible, because you're like, finish the draft, it's so great, and then you see all the problems with it, and then you have to do another draft, and you're like, okay, I worked so hard on this one, it's gonna be great. You have to do another draft and another draft, and I think I have come to realize that it does get better. It gets better every draft, but you need it to be really, 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 really better. So you need all those drafts to be good. And I think, well, like, you can fix things from the film, you know, from shooting in the edit, but I don't feel like you can fix a lot of writing problems later on.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can, but it's just hard, and you should make sure the script is very, very in good shape. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I've always put a lot of value into like the script writing stage, and like making sure that I've done a lot of drafts. I guess to counter that, in terms of like, I was trying to think of how I would even answer this question myself. I feel like the older I get, the less of a perfectionist I get. So I'm like, just go to camera with your first draft. Like, don't go to camera on your first draft. That's obviously a terrible idea. But I mean, on the other hand, like, I think things will, when you get to a good point and you know what you're doing and you know what the story's about and you know what you're trying to say, just try and do it. And then like you can fix it later. Kind of. Like, don't just be like on set, everyone's like, fix it in post, fix it in post. Like, obviously think ahead and like have some kind of plan. And like, for me, a lot of filmmaking is like envisioning it first, even at the script stage, of like what the shots are going to be and how I'm going to edit it together. But also let go a little bit, and like, what's that quote? Like, perfection is the enemy of the good. Like, just let it be good. doesn't need to be perfect. And then it'll probably be pretty, if you're aiming for perfect and you're like letting it slide a little bit, I think you're good. So yeah.
That is perfect advice, honestly. So good advice. You've definitely tapped into my biggest flaw. And that is, you know, perfection can avoid you from sharing your work and putting it out there and doing the step. And I have to totally agree with this and say that it's true. It's never perfect. It's never going to be perfect. So work hard, but don't let that stop you from
doing it.
And and discovering new things. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
It's a much better note to end on.
Just do it. Just try it out and you'll get there.